Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Dustin Amrhein. Dustin, how are you doing today? Thanks so much for joining us.
Good, Kevin. Thank you for having me on.
I want to start with your origin story, if you will. If I talked to a young Dustin before college, were there signs that you were going to become a CEO of Revcast? Were you interested in business, go-to-market, stuff like that as a kid?
Wow. Oh, no, I had no idea that this would be my career path. I will say I grew up in a family-owned business. So I grew up around, a family-owned commercial endeavor. Always, I worked from the time I was 12 all the way through college, and of course now in a career. So I've always been close to business. When I first went to college, though, my whole idea was that I was going to go to school to become a teacher, and I got maybe a semester through that and decided, hey, you know what? Like, I really want to go try this computer science thing out. I've got some friends that are over there. They seem to be doing some really fun stuff. Let me go do that. Right. And that's kind of what got started. It's how I got started in the software space is going through getting a computer science degree and going to be a software engineer the first part of my career.
That's interesting. So you're starting work really early in your life around your family business. So you are used to the concept of entrepreneurial world. What was your family business?
It's a hardware store. It was a local hardware store. So everything from trophies to paint to nails and pipe and everything in between. So it was very, obviously blue collar workers selling to blue collar people. But it was really looking back very formative in the sense of you have to work to generate the outcomes that you want. And in a family owned business in particular, there is nobody to call when you're sick. Right. There's no vacation days in particular. Right. That's your business. You own it and you run it.
Did it have that incredible hardware smell? The smell of hardware?
It did, like some sort of mix of spilled chemicals and old coffee brewing in the background somewhere.
I love that. I love that. I worked in like kind of landscaping maintenance and growing up, and there's something about that smell that seems to work for me. But you started as a software engineer, and then from what I can tell on LinkedIn, you transitioned into sales engineer. But this is at IBM. So can you take me through like that part of your journey, why you made that move?
Yeah, and I was so fortunate. A lot of it was happenstance and being in the right place, and like many of us, I'm sure can attest to, having the right mentors at the right time in your career. I was in software engineering, really loved what I was doing, loved solving problems, hard problems, problems that the Fortune 100 were trying to solve. And I had a mentor come to me and say, there's this really cool thing that we're about to spin up out of the software labs where we're going to like lean into developers and create a true developer advocacy program.
Mm.
And we're going to focus that on some of our emerging technologies and what we're doing in open source. And we need the core group to start it and to be the group that's going to go out and, be the face of these new technologies with developers all around the world. And at the time, I'm like, wow, it's a huge departure from what I'm doing day to day. But going back to how I grew up and working in retail and always being around people, that was something that kept pulling on me. I do want to be back in front of customers. I do want to be back, like actually working with people and helping them solve problems directly. So I got started in that advocacy program, and that sort of snowballed, Kevin, into sales engineering, where it was a natural step from that to get into sales engineering, where I had some of the most fun in my career working with really intelligent people and really awesome customers. And then into sales engineering leadership at IBM eventually.
That's interesting because, so many that come from software engineering, there's this moment where they have this unnatural need to step away from the code. It sounds like because of your time in the hardware store, that was a little more natural and even a pull for you. I'm curious if there's a point in that developer advocacy, sales engineering journey where you realize like, okay, I'm good at this. Like this is catching for me.
Yeah, I mean, I in particular was working on some of the earlier concepts from IBM cloud computing. IBM would argue that the mainframe was the first cloud computing ever, but like the true next generation cloud computing that IBM was working on. And I really I got into a tight working relationship with our labs. And then I started producing a lot of content, like writing a lot of blogs, creating a lot of demos.
Yeah.
And at one point, I can't even remember the list now. I don't think it's all that relevant, but at one point I made a list of, top 25 cloud computing industry thought leaders. And I'm like, wow, like I really love this. I love being able to teach and share. Right? That goes back to why I thought I was going to be a teacher, right? And when I started college, but I love to be able to teach and share. When I kind of found an audience that wanted to hear what I was saying, it was hard not to be gratified in some way by that. And I think that's when I really got into, wow, I want to go help customers more directly solve problems,
Yeah.
right? Because as a developer, you're building, and then there's this whole middle part of the supply chain that's taking what you're building and actually applying it for customers. I want it to be there. I want it to be closer to that.
Yeah, that makes sense to kind of get to see the fruits of your labor and touch the practical application. And I imagine that this will relate back to your teaching aspirations as well. But during the time you also became a leader, you're pretty young in your career, and you're leading a team or teams of people. What is that like for you to transition from individual contributor to leadership? Is there a moment that rings out? Because I feel like there's always one where it's like, okay, this is actually way different than what I expected for people.
Yeah, and it was, I think the important thing to call out there is it was within IBM, which meant not only was I a young leader, I was a young leader managing people 15, 20, 25 years older
Yeah.
than I was. But for me, I mean, I always like to share. Going back to share, I always like to share. And a lot of what I was sharing was not just with customers, but also internal and trying to help the team become better even before I became a leader. And I tried to take that mindset into leadership. I will say, though, early on, especially when you're young and it's your first time leading and you're leading in that environment, it's intimidating, right? And you're not sure when you have to sit down with somebody that's been doing something, 3 times as long as you have, and you have to have that coaching conversation. It's not easy the first few times. And then you start to find your footing, you start to find your own style. You take some of what you really appreciate it from other managers and try to make it your own in different ways. And it was gradual for me. There's no aha moment. And frankly, today I still struggle with certain aspects of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people do. And so you've evolved into a leader. You've evolved into this sales engineering position. And I don't want to make you go through every stop at your career, but I'll just kind of like list off some of them because I think it's really interesting that you've worn so many different hats before you stepped into your current role. VP Professional Services, VP Partner Sales, Vice President Customer Success, Strategic Alliances, Digital Adoption Solutions, Customer Experience. You're an executive in all of these different areas for high growth companies. Medallia, you spent a lot of time at Pendo. How do you continue to personally evolve throughout that journey? What are you, deciding when you're saying, okay, I think this is the next role I should take?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always want to be as close to customers as I possibly can. And early on, and once I made that switch into sales engineering, I knew that eventually I wanted to touch every part of a revenue organization. I'm a curious person. It's the one piece of advice that I give to anyone in any career. Like, no matter what you're doing, be curious. Be curious about the business. Be curious about the market. Be curious about everything around you. I've always been that way, even as a kid. I applied that especially to this whole go to market or revenue engines, if you will. And I looked, as I was looking to grow, I was looking to any other step I took. I wanted to be uncomfortable in it, right? Like I wanted it to be something that challenged me, that I didn't have all the answers or feel like I had all the answers for, that I felt like I would have to learn a lot and learn fast. So I always looked for something like that. And I always looked for something that would kind of naturally build or link on prior experience. So when I went from sales engineering to customer success in my first move, that to me was a very like natural extension. Now you're going from selling on the front end to how do I continually make you successful on the back end? And what does that look like to create a team and an approach to that? Professional services was like a dive deeper. Like it's one thing to sell, it's one thing to like nurture. How do you actually get in and build and do for
Yeah.
customers, and how do you do that well? So I always look like, how do things build on each other? Sales was a natural thing at some point, as was partner sales. I find it, especially in my role now, enormously helpful to have had those experiences across a revenue organization.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think it's something that is often missing. The curiosity piece that you bring up is really interesting to me. I always use the example of like sometimes we tell sales reps like you're a natural hunter or you're a natural farmer, and it sort of puts people in these boxes that they then aren't as used to moving into different areas of the business. For the people that you managed throughout your time or now, have you encouraged them to take rotations in different parts of the revenue organization?
I do. Now, I freely realize that, some people approach their career differently and they want to build depth in a particular area.
Yeah.
And I think that's great, right? And if that's what you want to do, then you still have to be intentional about how you think about progressing. But I would do my baseline default is you should absolutely have experiences outside of just one domain, because you know most people that you manage as an executive, as a VP or whatever it may be, most have aspirations beyond their current domain, their current function. And I encourage lateral moves, frankly,
Hmm.
from function to function. So I prioritize learning more than title step ups and things of that nature.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A little more tactically with this question, during your time at Pendo was a time of like major growth for Pendo, and Pendo was kind of like nuanced in the way that they thought about data points that companies could use to help. I'm curious what your experience there was like specifically related to kind of product data and how it's used in companies like from the start, where I assume that some of the customers you were approaching or talking to like might not have even had any idea. And by the end, there's this journey where now it's kind of baked into everything. Is that a fair hypothesis? Maybe you can tell the story of that trajectory.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I was at Pindo at a time where really from the very beginning of a Series B, so very early in the company, to post Series E, very different company at that point, very different market at that point, right? Like the early days was a lot about teaching companies why this was important, and there was good timing there in the sense of SaaS was really exploding. The chief product officer role was elevating in the organization, and there was a growing acceptance that, hey, like if we're going to build products that people love and continually pay for, we have to understand how they're using it, and we
Mm.
have to help them explore and continually find new areas of value in the product over time. And you need a tool set to do that. That's not really what your product mission is, right? That's around your product. And this notion of being able to use product data early on to inform better product decisions and to make data driven decisions versus gut decisions, that was a huge theme for Pendo early on. Now, as it's matured, it's very different. That's because the market is very different. There's very few product leaders out there that you would have to convince that they need product data. Right now, the key has become, well, how do I become a more product centric or product led company overall? And that's, one, how do I get not just product data, but all of the other signals about my product that are in G2 and, marketplaces? How do I get all of that? And how do I use that to inform decisions, not just in product, but in marketing and in sales and in finance and every part of the company?
Mm.
And so that's kind of been that journey of starting with a really passionate, growing function, the chief product officer and product teams at the time, and then growing not just to, really serve that base well, but showing a company how to become product led. That was really the journey that I experienced at Pendo. And it was, if you think about it from a go to market standpoint, you naturally evolve from selling one product to a single buyer and a single function in the company to selling multiple products to multiple different buyers across the company for different reasons. So like the go to market becomes one that's very focused and dogged. And simple, I don't use that in a bad way, but simple in terms of
Yeah.
the focus, to one that's much more complex, right? And a very different selling motion.
Yeah, I love the lens of the rise of the CPO, and then that basically being distributed as a priority throughout the company. You kind of need this agent, but then it becomes to an extent ubiquitous, but still complex and challenging. And so after that experience, you decide it's time to be a co-founder and CEO of Revcast. So tell me, what made you start the company?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually a couple of connections from Pendo that really got me excited here. One's a Pendo co-founder, Eric Bodick. Another is a longtime RevOps leader and was a RevOps leader at Pendo at one point when I was there, and we worked together, Jeff Serlin. And we had all, as folks that were heavily involved in go-to-market at Pendo, we spend a lot of time, especially during high growth periods, planning and readjusting plans, like constantly, right? It wasn't just a 2 or 3 month planning cycle. It was on the fly. You're changing based on how the business is performing and what areas it's strong in. And I'll be honest with you, it was a massive pain. Like the seed for Revcast is in the massive pain that we experienced there, right? Mm-hmm. Throwing spreadsheets around an organization, having to carve out an hour with finance to tell me how to read their spreadsheet that they created, right? So I could then tell them what I was thinking and, are we lining up? And, so that's where Revcast started. And it was just a problem that we all felt like was not being solved, was not being addressed. And revenue executives were not given any tools. We were buying all the software to run deals and to run the quarter and to optimize quarter growth. We were given no software other than spreadsheets to run the business, right? We were expected to do this in spreadsheets. And it was like, this is crazy. This is a huge opportunity. And that was like the genesis of it, where it came to us three.
And what presumably you're doing some kind of like user interviews and stuff to test the idea. I'm curious what you hear when you start like probing the market and saying, are you feeling this pain too? Are you feeling this pain too? Other companies coming back and saying like, yes, we know what you're talking about. Where are they at in their kind of like revenue planning and where do you meet people on their journey?
I think there's a couple of aspects to it. The revenue planning piece, you can go talk to any revenue leader, any RevOps leader, any finance leader for that matter, and you will quickly get head nodding around this. Like the way that we plan today is painful. The way that we plan today is siloed. The way that we plan today does not invite transparency and alignment and accountability. That's universally acknowledged. What is a little more educational at this point, and it reminds me of the early days of Pendo, is it's not just the planning piece, because another core part of what we do is we continually measure that plan and we continually help you optimize the plan. And the educational piece is one that I think we'll talk 2 or 3 years from now. Every go-to-market leader will acknowledge this. But today's revenue teams run on these very static, long cadences, right? Like you run weekly forecast meetings. That's your dynamic part of your business today. Mm-hmm. But then you have QBRs and you have half-year kind of planning and review. And those QBRs, so once every 3 months and once every 6 months, this are the only times that you kind of look back at some of the core assumptions that are built into your business model and say, are we performing against those the way that we expected? If there are deviations, are those deviations risk or opportunities for us? And then maybe at the quarterly boundary, more likely at a half-year boundary, you do something about what you see. But I think just like we saw development go from this massive, I lived through it, this massive transformation of waterfall to agile. I think go-to-market teams are going to have to get much more agile in the market that we're in today. And this notion of waiting 3 months to do something about things that are happening in the business will be ludicrous in a couple of years.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I do territory planning and design business, and so I see that all the time. Is you set things up for what you say is a year, and then all of a sudden, something happens, and you got to make that change. So the velocity is certainly picking up. I'm curious how you observe dynamics within departments at companies who, are interested in building a better go-to-market motion, are interested in testing hypotheses and moving more quickly, but maybe they don't have like the FP&A team talking to the revenue team in the way that they need to. What type of dynamics are you observing there?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of silos. So typically what we're seeing is very sporadic collaboration. We have finance in a room, we have marketing in a room, we have sales in a room. They're all creating their own plans for the year. and maybe every 2 weeks, whatever it is during the planning cycle, they come together and they're presenting and sharing plans. And finance is sharing the overall financial plan, right? Like, this is how many heads we're going to have in the business for the year. These are financial targets. This is what we're assuming for churn and expansion, new business. Marketing is, of course, presenting a lot of the demand gen plans. And then sales is coming in and saying, okay, here's a more bottoms up view of the world. Like, here's how we're going to build into the plan. But unfortunately, there's not enough alignment early. So there's typically a lot of scrambling at the end of the planning process to make sure things align, such as, does the timing of marketing's demand generation match up with the capacity on the sell side, right? Are those two things well linked? And then there tends to be, because of that last minute scrambling, a lot of, frankly, finance coming in and kind of overruling everybody in the end and
Yeah.
saying, like, no, this is the plan, right? Like, this is what we're doing. And I think it's unfortunate because it happens because there's no system that's encouraging better early alignment.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. What do you do in that scenario? I would imagine that's something that we kind of deal with in like our sales cycles is trying to predict that motion, because for us it tells us that the company's probably not going to buy our tech. I'm curious if you have had any good experience in kind of talking to those companies and saying, look, there's a new way to do this, and you can move faster, you can align better together, but it's going to take a change in behavior. How has that message been felt?
Yeah, I think for us, one of our early learnings that we're, admittedly still working to act on and implement well has been that, one, we need to understand that dynamic. How does planning, like, talk to us about your planning process? Who's spearheading that? What are the different responsibilities among, in particular, finance, marketing, and sales?
Hmm.
We're almost always talking to revenue leaders on our side. We're purpose built for revenue leaders. But I have learned that we do better in sales cycles when we invite those other personas into the cycle earlier. We don't try to hide from them. We don't try to, sneak one in on the rest of those teams. But instead, we encourage the sales like, hey, bring your head of finance in. Let's talk about this, because they probably do a lot of the quota capacity modeling, and that's part of what we do. So let's share with them that part. Then bring your marketing leader in. Let us talk to them about how we think about pipeline planning on the revenue side, what that means and how we account for it here. And so we've had success by trying to better engage those secondary personas for us, those secondary buyers, influencers, if you will, and then trying to be sneaky and fast, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And you've worn, so many hats, and as a CEO, you're wearing all of them. I'm curious if, given your history or given your current day to day, is there a place where, when you're in a particular business motion, whether it be, developing product, whether it be speaking to customers, is there one area that still kind of feels the most at home for you?
Working with customers is still my absolute favorite. Look, I love to sell. I love that the whole hunt and the, trying to convince somebody that your idea is better than something else. But at the end, I love actually helping people implement and use our product. That's where I get the most passion, where I get the most ideas from too, right? I mean, that's where the rubber really meets the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned curiosity. I just got a couple more quick questions, but I wanted to add one about curiosity. Our market is changing. The SaaS market is changing. Is there anything that you're most curious about to kind of see how it unfolds over the next couple of years, whether that be how revenue organizations are structured on the technology front? I'm curious what's top of mind for you.
There's so many things. I think one that comes to mind is, we're already seeing this quite a bit, but at the end of the day, what will AI's impact be on pricing and packaging in the software industry? Because for so long, even if going back to perpetual license models like we sold at IBM, for so long, there's this fixed static component of pricing that, we've always gotten away with. And I say gotten away with because we build fancy business cases and we have, these fixed components of pricing. Yeah, in a lot of cases, you hope that you live up to the business case you made. But what if you don't? Well, what if you don't? The consumer is still paying, what you license them for. And I think what we're seeing with AI is a much closer alignment of pricing to value perception or value driving.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be crazy to watch. And I think the other area that I'm really interested to see how it's going to evolve is demand gen. Like we're seeing so many different trends now emerge, right? And some of the tried and true is still out there, but some of the old school outbound like legacy approaches are clearly not performing the way that they were before. And I know there's been a lot of money being poured into this problem, and I'm seeing some pretty cool solutions. But I'm more interested in how buyers are changing than I am technology changing around them.
Can I ask if you have any observations on how buyers are changing so far? So far, those new channels and new ways of selling are definitely impacting everyone that I'm talking to. So if you have any
Yeah,
consistency observing from buyers, I'd love to hear it.
yeah. I think the biggest thing that we're all seeing is that we're dealing with buyers are they're ready to learn. If you can teach them something about like their domain or their market, they're certainly ready to listen. I think buyers now, we talk about intent a lot. I think buying intent now is, are they going to your website? Are they actively looking at your product? Are they looking at competitors? There's just, buyers are doing so much more to inform themselves now that like this whole push and educating them around the product and not something domain related or market related, it's almost impossible to do because if they want to learn about it, they're going to learn about it before they talk to you. And we see the explosion of digital sales rooms and of automated demos and self-guided tours and technologies that support that. I think we're just at the beginning of that full change. We're also starting to see marketplaces get built up for vendors to have always on demos and always on different pitches and things like that. And we're trying to marketplaces for buyers. It'll just be interesting to see how that all pans out because I don't think they want us calling them 5 times in 2 weeks to listen to a product pitch anymore. Right.
No, I tend to agree with you. I think it's good that you mentioned you like to be uncomfortable earlier because as a CEO trying to move the business forward, I know that it's an uncomfortable time, but an exciting one. And Dustin, I'm super grateful to you for joining and kind of talking us through your career lens and through all that you have going on at Revcast. I'll link the company in the notes to this interview, and we'll push out a couple of snippets on LinkedIn. But before we go, I have one kind of last question. You mentioned before you got into college, you were a worker and you were used to the family business lifestyle, but you weren't sure exactly where things were going to take you. I'm curious if you go back and any advice that you would bestow upon young Dustin at that time.
Yeah, be more curious early. I think I went into college and college was daunting, right? Like it's a whole new environment and it was pick your own adventure as opposed to school. All up to that point was you just go and do what you're told and maybe you get to
Yeah.
pick a class or two. This is full pick your own adventure. I think going back would tell myself, give it a year, give it 2 years, go explore, go be curious about things that you've never really thought about. Maybe I would end up right where I am now. I've had a heck of a fun ride, but I would definitely, and I've got kids that are getting closer to that age, and that's the advice I'm going to give them.
I love that. A reminder to stay curious, a reminder that you do have the choice to choose your own adventure, and a positive note to end on. Dustin, thanks so much. Be well, enjoy life in Baton Rouge, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Kevin.